Welcome to our special Luminate 2024 mid-year report episode. The report drops this week. We sat down with Luminate Vice President of Music Insights and Industry Relations, our friend Jaime Marconette. He walks us through this incredible report.
And I got to say, Jay, doing this podcast, one of the greatest things is talking to the people that actually make the sausage because this stuff is so complicated and complex, and to hear how it rolls out and what they do and the results, it's so interesting. So we are so happy to have Jaime come on the show and walk us through a lot of these things. So we hope you will like it too. So without further ado, let us go hit the button right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. 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 Standing by. Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Jaime Marconette, so great to see you. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you guys. Good to see you again, too.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. If you work in the music industry, you know what Luminate is. But for students, maybe those that are new to the business, tell us a little bit about what's Luminate.
Well, a lot of people know us as the data provider for the Billboard charts. You know, if you go back in history, we at one point a long time ago were called SoundScan and then Nielsen Music. It's changed a lot over the years with different ownership and things like that. But in May 22, rebranded to Luminate, we provide the data for the Billboard charts. And I start with that because that sort of informs our position, right? Because we do Billboard Japan and we do Billboard Middle East and we do all these other ones as well. And so we have data sources, over 500 daily data sources, streaming, physical. We have consumer research that fields surveys in 30 plus countries. And so we are the data set for the global music industry.
Excellent. Well, and most importantly, you just got a promotion recently, so congratulations, and talk about what your role is at Luminate.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Yes, so I am VP Music Insights and Industry Relations here at Luminate, and essentially what that role entails is being able to help tell the story of the music industry using our data set. So that comes out in the mid-year report and the year-end reports and our Tuesday Takeaway newsletters and overall adding themes and narratives to what we're seeing on the data side at Luminate, and then being able to share that out so everybody has a sense of where the industry is at in terms of consumption and consumer research and where it could possibly maybe be going as well.
Congratulations. So
Thanks,
let's talk about the report. This is the Luminate 2024 mid-year music report, and that compares the first half of 2023 with this first half of 2024. Let's kick it off. How was the growth of streaming in the U.S. With those two 6-month periods compared?
Yeah, thanks, Jay, for bringing that up. Definitely want to start there, you know, and we track on the global level as well as the U.S., and this is in the report. You know, one thing I am going to call out, streaming is still going up. We are still adding more volumes of streams. this is continuing at both the global level and it's continuing at the US level. Now, I would be remiss though if I didn't point out that, the numbers that you're going to see in this report are a little bit less in terms of growth than they were last year at this time, right? Last year at this time, I think we were showing global on-demand audio growth at a little north of 20%. Right now, it's about 15% in terms of global for this half year over last half year, and the US is at 8%. So we are seeing a little bit of a slowdown there. Again, numbers and volumes are still increasing, and obviously there's always a play of bigger denominators and volumes make it harder. But we are seeing that the numbers are just a little bit lower than they were 23. However, the other caveat I would mention is that, while researching this, we actually saw how stellar 2023 was. So just for people who are listening to keep in mind that though I'm quoting numbers that are a little less, they're also coming after a year that was pretty extraordinary, especially in the first half of last year.
Got it.
That's a good perspective for sure. And Jay and I talk about Latin music so frequently on the show, and it's of course been such a big story in the last few years. Talk about where Latin music is in this first half of this year.
Yeah, Latin, right? Latin continues to grow and continues to expand, and also continues to be one of the fastest growing genres that we have in the U.S. And this has been, for quite a couple of years now. And so what we found is that, yes, Latin is still fastest growing in the U.S. One of the ways that we wanted to cut it this year, which is maybe a little bit different than what we've done in the past, is typically we've said, okay, these are your fastest growing just by year over year growth. And sort of getting back to what I had just mentioned about the denominators and volumes. And so what we did is we said, okay, well, which genres have grown their piece of the pie the most? And so we're doing it by share points in this one. And when you do that, Latin grew their share of the entire industry pie the most, which was 0.51 share points. So they're ahead of all the other genres as they continue to do that. One thing I think that's interesting about Latin too is it also, if you're looking at the genre itself in the US, in terms of on-demand audio streams, its makeup of current versus catalog, it streams the most current at about 35%. And we see that from the fastest growing genres, it's high impact hits, right? And it's new current music, and Latin's also the one that streams the most current. And so that really is it's those new hits that are fueling it.
Yeah, there's a great section in the report on distribution. What did you learn about major distribution, artists versus the indies?
Yeah, this is a really interesting thing. One of the things we wanted to take a look at, and a lot of people are familiar with our streaming pyramid, right? And how many tracks are at these different thresholds. But we wanted to take that further in this report, and we actually wanted to dive in and look at, well, number one, look at it by a little bit more by artist in these certain thresholds, and then also really show, okay, what is the makeup of these thresholds as well, right? And so when we were doing this, we wanted to look at the distribution of that's tied to the most streamed song or most streamed ISRC for these artists at these different thresholds. And we saw that mid-tier artists, and we're kind of defining that really in sort of the 1 million to 10 million on-demand audio streams this year, and also just the category above it, which would be the 10 to 50 million. And all of this is in a report, and you can dive into it more. But what we saw is that the amount of independently distributed music and distributed artists were actually growing in these tiers. And we looked at this by, again, as I said, the most streamed ISRC from that artist, and then looked at if it was major distribution or if it was indie. And we saw that at all of these different thresholds, there were more indie artists. Also more artists in general, which is great, as people are able to grow their streaming livelihoods. But we did see that indie was really starting to grow in these areas. And one area that we wanted to call out was that, indie artists made up 62% of all the artists that we saw who had streamed 1 million to 10 million times so far this half year. And overall, there are 1,400 more artists in that tier than there were in the second half of last year as well. So more artists are reaching these areas. The other thing I'll call out though is that we do see that majors still kind of they did definitely own the sort of the top of this, right? 43 out of 46 artists who had 1 billion or more streams had major distribution. But we are seeing that the indies are starting to rise up into these other categories as well.
In the report, there's an interesting stat you point out. Consumers at risk of churn from a paid streaming subscription disproportionately prioritize certain features when compared to the average paid music streamer. Talk about that.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for going through that. That's a mouthful for sure. We hear a lot about premium streaming and ad-supported streaming and subscription rates and those sorts of things. And one of the things that we've noticed is that in your more developed nations and your more developed markets like the U.S. and in Europe, your amount of premium subscribers is just higher than it is in more developing nations. And so part of it is, if everybody, or not everybody, but there are higher numbers of people subscribing in these countries, like what are sort of those differentiators, or what are those things that certain groups of fans could be looking for in terms of their DSPs? And our consumer research team was hard at work also trying to identify, what are the groups of fans who are currently signed up to a DSP and they're saying, hey, we might change our DSP. What do those fans really, really care about? And we kept coming back to, a couple of core areas that different groups of fans would call out. And it's items like exclusive artist content or additional content outside of music or these sorts of things. And I think, what also gets really, really interesting is when you start breaking that down at the genre level and how genre fans are, maybe more likely to say exclusive artist content. We have a stat in the mid-year report. Hip hop fans in the U.S. are 22% more likely to consider access to exclusive artist content on a DSP as an important feature for them. And so we try to break down, if people are differentiating their services, what are those that line up with different fan groups that could be interested? And so I think it's a really interesting question, especially when considering that in sort of your more developed markets, you're really kind of maybe fighting over the same pool of subscribers, right? So what could differentiate one from another?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Throughout a lot of your reports, you talk about SEA and equivalents. Talk a little bit about what they are and why they matter.
Yeah, so we dove in on this one in this report, and I think I'm going to start with a little bit of background on this topic. So essentially, what SEA is, it's streaming equivalent albums, and that takes into account premium audio, premium video, takes into account ad-supported audio, ad-supported video. To build these tiers, premium it takes 1,250 streams to equal one equivalent album. Ad supported, it takes 3,750 streams of ad supported to equal one album. And I set that up because I've been doing some presentations in the past, and I've always referenced, we have more premium streams now in the U.S., and this is a trend for everybody who's listening to, is that in the U.S. there has been a trend of more premium share of streaming in recent years. And I've always kind of said in the presentations, and what that does is it helps you get to equivalence faster. Well, I was having a conversation with a friend, and we were talking about this, and we started realizing that if you start looking at the consumption makeups of different tracks or different albums and those sorts of things, you could start to come up with what we're calling a blended stream here, and the average blended stream for a album equivalent. And it's been really, really interesting because, number one, as premium share has gone up, right, you've got more of those 1,250 equals an album. You see that the average number of blended streams on the Billboard 200 is what we look at in the report. The average number of streams required for an album has gone down slightly over the years, right? So it was over 1,400 for a while, and now it's at 1,390. So it's dipped just a little bit, and that's because of more premium streaming in the market, which means that you have more of those that are worth $1,250. I think that what we take it a little bit further, and I'd encourage everybody to check out, is that, you know, then we looked at, okay, well, what is sort of the average streaming consumption of these ad-supported and premium streams for rock or for country or for Latin or for electronic and dance, and looking at then what the average amount of streams it would take for those to equal an album equivalent. And it's really fascinating. But I think that what's important for people to understand is that this is all sort of built off of, you know, the fact that premium streaming has gone up. And because that's a little bit of a variable, it then causes these other changes based off of that. And it's really fascinating. And, I think it has some wide-reaching effects there.
Let's talk about live music, because I've been spending a lot of money this summer. What did your research for the report tell you about the live sector?
Yeah, it told us, there's a lot of really interesting things that's happening in live. So just at a very surface level, we found that live music events made up 64% of all the money spent on music related costs. And one thing that we were looking at is we actually found that in quarter 2 of this year, Gen Z reported spending the most on live on concerts to us. We have historically in our data set, and we went back and checked, we've always had millennials saying this. You know, it's always been millennials that have spent the most. This is quarter 2 in our data set is the first time that Gen Z actually came and said that they spent more. I think that, talking with our consumer research team, a lot of this is also festivals and things like that, might maybe have a higher ticket price. But I think it's definitely an important thing to call out that this was the first time that Gen Z told us that they were the ones that were spending the most and more than the millennials. So I think it'll be interesting to continue to look at this too, especially if you go through the summer concert season, what that makeup looks like, or what it looks like in a fall, maybe, when Gen Z could potentially be back at, school or those sorts of things too in college. But that was a really, really interesting thing. One other thing I want to call out is that we did a deep dive on shows, artists, and markets. And we wanted to see, what the local DMA impact is of a concert in that town. And we found that the median, when we looked at, I think it was 50 artists, 990 shows, 129 markets, we found that at the market level, the median amount of bump that week of the show is 42% in streaming. And I think that oftentimes when you're looking at the national level, that could get maybe a little bit lost in the overall story. But that when you're looking down at the market level, you're actually seeing, greater impact happening. And I will also call out that we did see, we rank them in the report, and electronic dance music had the greatest week over week change that week of a show since the show in that area.
Great. One of the parts of the report that I found really fascinating was your reporting on short-form videos, because it's really a short-form video world today. And what did you learn about music listeners that watch short-form videos in the U.S.?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. So there's definitely a few stats on this, but one of the things I want to call out is that we found that 76% of music listeners have watched short-form video in the U.S. 22% of music listeners have posted. And we wanted to kind of zero in on this posted aspect a little bit. And this is consumer research reported to us by fans. And we wanted to zero in on this posted because I think one of the interesting things that we did is we started to, kind of cut this by audience as well. And you can see that your K-pop and your J-pop fans are more likely to post on short form video. And then there's other genre rankings and things like that. But I think that where the marketing advantage might come is, when you start to think about, okay, well, who are those fans that could be posting? How do I get them to post my music? My sound, how do I find, how do I target those or build campaigns around that? So I thought that was really, really interesting. And then we do historically just track how many consumers tell us are using which platforms. And, one of the things that we found was that TikTok is still the market leader in terms of people telling us the percentage of fans who that are telling us that they're using TikTok. But we're seeing some growth from YouTube Shorts as well. YouTube Shorts, and you can see it. There's a graph in the report, and it lays them all out. But wanted to call out that this was over the first half of last year we saw a jump there.
I tend to look at things from a U.S. perspective because obviously I'm based in the U.S. But of course, thankfully, you guys look at things with a global perspective. Talk about what you've learned about the global music listening behavior, because that's really interesting.
So Mike, last year we did the language analysis, right? And when we were taking a look at that and thinking about that, we wanted to also look at country of origin. Because obviously, people from the UK, they sing in English. We sing in English here in the US. Canada sings, a lot of the Canadians sing in English. So we wanted to look at country of origin as well. And we found that it tells a little bit of a similar story. We go into the top 3 countries that have gained the most in terms of the artists from those countries and their global streaming share. And we look at the ones that have declined the most too. In terms of their overall streaming share. The US is in the top 3 there for declining in streaming share. I think it declined about just share points again. I think it's just about a half a share point again for that, but the top 3 are in there. What we also thought was interesting though is that we saw that Mexico and Brazil are 2 of the top 3 gaining share. Obviously, regional Mexican music has had an explosion, and that's definitely still being felt. So that was one of the things that we wanted to look at this year, was more based on country of origin. And then there's also some really, really fun things in there, and I'll just talk about Brazil for a second as well. We looked at genres inside of these countries. They either over-index or under-index to their own region, right? Mm-hmm. And so we've got several different ones that you can look at, and it's really fun because you can start seeing how different consumers or listeners in different countries kind of prioritize or what they're into. And one of the things that we thought was really interesting is that when you look at Brazil and where it over indexes or under indexes compared to Latin America, which is our set there, we actually saw that Brazil over-indexed in religious, it over-indexed in blues, and it over-indexed in country and folk compared to the rest of Latin America. It under-indexed in reggae, easy listening, and it under-indexed in Latin, actually. And then remember, this is to the rest of Latin America. So we thought that was really interesting. Obviously, you do have maybe a potential language component there with Portuguese, and then also, we're seeing Brazil really rise up as a more developed music market, and so this also it would be interesting to go and see what other sort of local genres are taking off, or those sorts of things that might not be in the rest of Latin America if they've got their scene down there.
Yeah. It's really a streaming world, but people still buy physical product. What did you find in this report about the trends with physical product?
Sure. Yeah. Well, one of the things we looked at, and this has been a pretty big conversation, right, over the winter and the spring in terms of sustainability and variance. And we did see that, the number of variants per album, especially if you're looking at a Billboard Top 10 album, has definitely gone up. We noticed a change in a graph, and you can see it in the report, that it started kind of going up in the second quarter of 2020.
Yeah.
And that, we are having more and more variants now.
And talk about that a little bit, Jaime. For those that don't know, describe what a variant is.
Thank you. Yes. A variant is, you might release an album, but you have a limited edition red vinyl, or maybe there's a partner that you have a limited edition, or maybe even your own e-com store has a limited edition. And if you're naming these or producing these different variants, they each have separate UPCs as well. Right. And so essentially it's an album, but it's packaged in different ways. So what we're tracking here is we're tracking the amount of unique UPCs for physical product on these. And that's how we've defined a variant. And you see that, it starts going up in quarter 2, 2020. And there's a trend line in there that you can check out. But we're also seeing, kind of getting back to the sustainability conversation, is that we also saw that from our consumer research that physical music buyers are actually more likely to say that they are concerned, or they would cite as a cause that they are concerned about, or is sustainability and reusability. So we thought that was really a really interesting thing, that these physical music purchasers are actually more likely to say that. And that could also probably open up some marketing opportunities and things like that, recycled materials, those sorts of things for people to use too. But we dive in a little bit on the differences between audience as well in there. I think in our mid-year report, I think what, as we're kind of having this conversation, and what I've been thinking about over the last couple of days as well, is that I think we really wanted to take a look at how different audiences are engaging with music. And I think you'll see that with our physical buyers or our short form users, or, throughout the report. I think that's sort of the common thread. And I'm just kind of riffing here right now. But, I think that, that's sort of that common thread is, how are different audiences, either in the US or abroad, how is everybody engaging with music in these different ways? And it's a really beautiful thing, right? Because it's like everybody comes together and then they have their own ways of engaging and interacting with music.
Yeah. Well, listen, where can people learn more about you and Luminate and dig into these great reports that you guys do?
Well, you can download the report from our website if you go to luminatedata.com, luminatedata.com. And that's where you'll be able to find this report. You'll be able to find other reports as well. But this mid-year report, year-end report, but these are available for free, and you can find it through our website there. There's also some newsletters that people can sign up for if they want a weekly stat for Tuesday Takeaway and things like that too. We have a lot of fun with those, and hopefully they bring value to the industry. But that's where everybody can find out more about us or our resources.
It's awesome. Well, and we appreciate the hard work that goes into it, because that is
sure do.
Brutal number crunching. And as someone who took and failed statistics in college and had to take it again, I can tell you that I appreciate that hard work, because that is not a skill set I have. But boy, we sure are the beneficiaries of all that hard work, Jaime. We appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure. So good to see you guys. Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Thanks again. We'll talk soon.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.